Welcome to a new episode of Entre Artistas with Stephen Nachamie. We have the honor today to have this award-winning stage and film director. He has worked on Broadway, off-Broadway, regionally, and internationally. Stephen is developing and directing new works on stage and film all the time. Over his career, he has worked with celebrities such as Alan Menken, Kelly Pickler, Josh Groban, one of my favorites, Laura Benanti, Zachary Levi, Gene Krakowski, Sutton Foster, and among many others artists. We have a high caliber director today from Broadway. He has also been awarded in the New York Filmmakers New York Festival in 2015 for the movie Winning New York, in which I had the opportunity to be part of. So it's a pleasure to have you here, Stephen. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. It's good to see you. I'm glad that we could do this together. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, thank you for accepting. First of all, in which projects are you working on? What projects are on the doorstep?
So I have a few that I can talk about, a few that are in development. But right now there's actually another short movie musical. It's called What's Left.
Okay.
And I collaborated with a wonderful screenwriter and composer. They both did lyrics, Ayisu Larti and Morgan J. Smart. And I worked with them in separate years. I directed their final projects at NYU Graduate Musical Theater Writing Program.
Okay.
And I brought them together for this project. Again, it was through New York Film Academy because we had the time to develop it, which was great.
Yes.
And we developed it it was really fun, like we worked together in Winning New York.
Yes.
It was very different. This one was a little dark, it dealt with mortality.
Okay.
I brought in the word legacy and heritage.
Okay.
And through work and brainstorming, it became about what happens to a high school class, the senior class, when they come back from winter break and their most influential teacher has died. And these two the composer doesn't really write what you think of as musical theater. He writes real hard rock, real heavy metal, real jazz. So it was very interesting to take this very different sound and make it part of that world. And it's going to the film festivals now, which is why I brought it up. I'm working on an adaptation of a novel, stage adaptation called Letters to Montgomery Clift by award-winning novelist Noella Lumet.
Okay.
And he and I have talked about this project and worked on it in different ways for several years. It's about a young boy. It's during the Marcos regime in the Philippines, and a young boy is sent to live with his aunt in California. The boy's father has been incarcerated, and so the mother sends him away. And basically, it's about a boy wanting to see his mother again. And what we found is that the novel was written in the late 90s, and I read it in the late 90s, and the writer, we were in our mid-20s, and
Yes.
we looked at it now. So the world's a little different and a lot the same.
I know.
And some of the reasons why he wrote it then have changed, but we kind of have had, he's been very, very generous with the time to take it apart and put it back together. So that's another piece I'm working on. I do a lot of multimedia lectures on the internet and on Zoom about different aspects behind the scenes of Broadway, the creation of shows, about stars that you may not have known or people who didn't get quite there to say. It's called Beyond the Footlights.
Yeah.
The subtitle's Broadway Legacy with Stephen Nachamie. And that's something I've been very excited about to share. And it's about the great love stories of Broadway.
Congratulations. I didn't know
Thank
that.
you.
And that leads to my other questions. Could you share the people how you started on Broadway? How long it takes to put on set a musical? A lot of people are interested in that.
On Broadway.
For a Broadway show, or when you are on TV, on film.
Okay.
How did you manage the minimum weeks that are required for set a musical, for example, on Broadway?
So for a musical on Broadway, it could be, along the way there are workshops and pre-production. So it's never exactly the same time from when you start writing it until it's open, or until it makes it to Broadway. Sometimes it's very quick. Sometimes like Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder, I think took about over 10 years, and it finally happened. But with She Loves Me, where I was associate director to Scott Ellis, it was in motion because the artistic director, Todd Hames, who just passed away, of Roundabout Theater, wanted to celebrate their 50th season. And when they did She Loves Me in 1993, that was the very first musical they ever did, you know, in their Broadway series.
Okay.
And so they had asked Scott Ellis to do it again for the 50th anniversary. And I was probably brought in, I know they'd been working on it probably with ideas and brewing it for about a year before it opened. And I came into it probably 4 or 5 months before it opened. And that, because it was an existing musical, dealt with starting with how are we going to tell the truth of the story in a different way. And, you know, the market of Broadway has changed. So you need celebrities or people who are known, especially with a show like She Loves Me, whose name is not already known. You need celebrities to come in. And as it went along, it was about getting a different perspective, starting with a different set designer than they had before, named David Rockwell. And David Rockwell is very smart and very inventive. He's done shows like Hairspray. I think he did Kinky Boots. He's done almost every show on Broadway you've seen, but he's also, and I hope I didn't get Kinky Boots wrong, but he also works in designing spaces and restaurants and hotels and seeing how people's behavior exists within different spaces and colors and shapes. And what they decided early on, because generally She Loves Me was first done in 1963 and it was done with 2 turntables, and they thought, well, let's do something different. So the kind of inspiration that they started with was that it was going to be a jewelry box, going to be a little jewel box. So they took a lot of the Art Deco. The show takes place in 1934 in Budapest, Hungary. So they decided closed up, it would look like a jewelry box, but then and a storefront, right? And then it opened up in sort of a magical way where it would breathe in a very cinematic way. And there you were inside the shop. So it started with that. And then it started thinking about, well, how do we tell this in a way, now that we have this breadth we didn't have before, we have all this movement, which is kind of bigger than the production. This other production was very intimate, and this was sort of bringing it to the audience. So within pre-production, I think they worked on that for about a year to 9 months, because that also meant, with a budget, finding out how to do all the hydraulics under the stage. Okay. Which I think it cost $1 million or something, that set. It won the Tony Award. But it was about also, how do you tell this story from 1934 about these 2 people who are longing for love, who write letters to each other anonymously through a newspaper where they find the ad to write to each other. But how do you tell that today when nobody writes letters anymore, really? Where everybody's writing emails or texting and WhatsApp. WhatsApp, exactly. So part of what they wanted to look at is what the pacing of the show would be, but I'll get to that in a second. And we looked for, Jane Krakowski did end up doing it, you know, from 30 Rock, and Kimmy Schmidt. She ended up doing it. She was just lovely to work with. And Gavin Creel ended up doing it. Zachary Levi, who's now Shazam and everything. I know. So the pre-production was really started with, what is the essence of it going to be? How does this script reflect all of this? And also they decided they wanted it to sound a little bit different than it had before. They brought in a new orchestrator to look at it in different ways. So they really approached it in some ways like it was a new musical, because, you know, the director had already done it. The theater company had already done it. And how do we tell this differently? Yes. And appeal to an audience who does not write letters, who does not write in cursive, who does not have to wait. Because when they did it in 1993, you know, email started to exist, but nobody had it. And it was, you know, the internet and YouTube and all that wasn't there. So it was this event you had to go see, and it was a great success then. But in terms of that, I think it also depends on the production and the amount of time you have, because then we had, I want to say it was 4 or 5 weeks. I think our rehearsal process was kind of encapsulated. It was about 4 to 5 weeks of rehearsal in the studio. And that started with a table read and music rehearsal. And we did some things a little bit out of order because our celebrities had some conflicts where one of them had to do promotion for a TV show, or one of them had to shoot another TV show. But by the end of the first week, we had a vocabulary of what the world was and behavior and how the movement was in terms of, you know, what they wore and what the consensus was of the time. Part of that, preparing the actors for that, I, as associate director, I did really an extensive amount of research that I shared with the actors. So I gave them a lot of background on why a store, a perfumery, and letting them know it really wasn't until movies, until the big stars and the love stories came out in the 1920s that, you know, with Max Factor in Hollywood, there were stores. So you could look as lovely as the celebrities on the screen and look as appealing. So I gave them that. I gave them some background towards Lonely Hearts Club and writing each other. I gave them background on the creation of the piece and where it came from the original play, The Perfumery, to the movie, The Shop Around the Corner, and the creation of She Loves Me and sort of a different incarnation. So they had research on that. Then they had research on the place and the time, Budapest in 1934, the Great Depression, that the fact that it wasn't somebody wanted a job, that there weren't many jobs and they wanted the job. And what is the other, I got into a little bit of the politics of male and female, the gender politics at the time and what that balance was, and pop culture of the time. What would have been their references? You know, that their escape would have been books and movies and radio a little bit, and music. So I really went into a lot of research so that they could ground in the time. And what was great is that not only had the actors done their own research, but they had so many questions for me to dive into, sort of the basics that I gave. So that was a lot of putting us all in the same world. Within that time, because the show does take place in a store, in a perfumery, Scott Ellis, the director, with the actors, because it's not in the script necessarily, but he really worked on the specificity of who had what position in the store, who had what job, what they were selling, where it was, how they... So it was developing the characters and developing the place and the time. All began to happen in the first 2 weeks while we were staging scenes. I think by the 5th week, which was interesting because it's Broadway and we had that rehearsal space. We had 2 rehearsal spaces, actually, one upstairs and one downstairs. Choreography, I think, was upstairs, and they had a mock-up of the set. They had all of that. We had all of that downstairs, too, so we could work, you know, 2 departments at once. But because we were getting into the theater and the set and everything was so involved, our stage manager, we had another stage manager with us. Our stage manager was at the theater showing us, you know, videos of how the set moved, so we could get ideas of what we were getting into. The whole time also, with the pre-production and rehearsal, we were getting videos from the scenic shop of how that set moved. So as we created it, we understood a little bit more of what the look of it, what the movement of the show would be. So all of that went on at once. And then we got into the theater and we started to add costumes and lights. And on Broadway, I want to say we had 2 to 3 weeks of tech, but it really was finding out the choreography in terms of the beauty of the movement and the music, movement of people, but also how to be safe, because there were only certain ways, you know, all of it's kind of looked like it never stopped moving. And that was really the tech process and running some scenes. Because it was so intricate, we did a run through in the studio, I want to say something like February 6th. And then 3 weeks later, our next full run through, I believe was in front of an audience for the first preview with the orchestra and lights and all that. The cast had never had a chance to have an invited audience. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that, but it happened. So it really, you know, each show, I guess the amount of time, I believe the Broadway contract, you're supposed to have 5 to 6 weeks in the studio, and then another, I think it's 3 weeks in the theater before you start previews. It is a set contract with Actors Equity and the unions, but each show uses that in a different way. If you have a simple play, they may be able to put it up one way and then within rehearsals break it down again. During tech, they might change things. During previews, Previews, there's several shows I've seen that changed very dramatically different in previews.
Yeah.
But each show, something like Wicked, used a lot of tech time and had a lot of pre-production.
Of course.
And had a lot of meetings. We had a lot of models to work with of how our set worked. So we had an idea, even though the set was huge, it needed to move very fast. So you had to get used to writing the set. And if you were an understudy, I had to teach them exactly where they had to be and which part of the set they had to be. So it was really more logistics. I think logistics of costumes, logistics of movement when we got into the theater. But it depends on the show for Broadway. If it's a small musical with 4 people, they'd use the time differently. So each process is used in a different way. I will say with our process, in our preview process, also in answer to your question, we did start rehearsals January 5th and started the week after Valentine's Day. So I think around the 21st or something for previews. Scott Ellis, the director, he's been doing TV now. So he worked in a very interesting way in previews, which was a lot of the editing of the show happened like you would edit in an editing bay for a movie or for a sitcom, where he would look at how the audience reacted and, I'd be taking notes. He'd go, okay, that door needs to open when that door closes. You need the gap closed in between those lines. She should enter earlier. We need to hear that word. And all of a sudden I went, oh, he's taking the best of everything he does for the audience to have this great experience.
Yes.
Yeah, he used all that time. It was great.
Awesome. And that leads to the other question I want to ask you is, how do you direct actors? I know because people want to know. I had the experience with you in directing me. If there is any difference between actors and celebrities?
Interesting. Do you want me to talk about both plays and film, or just in general, sort of with
just
direction?
In general, yeah.
In general, well, first of all, in auditions, it's about finding the vibe of the person that's done their homework and brings themselves, from here to it, and that you want to have a collaboration with in that rehearsal room. And you read them with people and you get the vibe that they can react to certain people and that there's a great collaboration. One of the first things I say to the cast, as right before we read, just to give an idea, is that we're going to read this together. Even if they know it, we're going to read it together to make sense of it. We're going to read through it slowly so they get just the facts, so that everybody starts to get the facts and the world and the questions. And it's very important to me as a director to listen to and watch every character follow one thread, to follow their thread. And it's interesting. It's interesting because I've worked with actors from people just starting. I've worked with celebrities. I've worked with extraordinary people where you sort of get a shorthand of how do I work with them? Is it sort of a code word? Is it a way to have a shorthand, so that they get what they need? You don't over explain things, or you don't, because sometimes it can be perceived like you're trying to put them in a box if you say too much.
Yes.
Sometimes if you say too little, so it's about finding the way to work together, finding a way to build that community, giving some air for that for exploration to happen. Now, in the process of in film, we developed a new musical together, so we had a little more time to really work on it. But generally, if you have a short amount of time in film, it's sort of like the difference between theater and film is it's almost like there's less work of rehearsal, and then all of a sudden you're in tech for a longer time and getting freedom on set. And part of that is also knowing how to trusting the actors know their process, but knowing what to give them to keep free. On film, I find it very different because you get sort of rehearsal of getting the base of it, but what's not in the frame is not important. I had one actor on a film who needed to find a moment funny in a certain way, each time. And I said to her, well, what do you need? Because we've done so many shots. And she said, she was being a smart ass. She said, I need you to stand over there and twerk. So I did, and it got her every single shot because she was looking over the other actor's shoulder, and so it's really finding out what the actors need, but making sure that everybody's on the same track to tell the same story. One of the first things I say to actors, and I don't know if we talked about this in a different class, is as a director and as a teacher, I said to them, I don't want to see what's in my head ahead of time, because I can stay home like this and just have a lovely time, but I'd rather see what people bring to it and get the surprises. Because the film we did, so many surprises happened on set or in rehearsal.
I remember.
That made it into the film. And you had to deal with filming in Times Square.
Yes,
with your guitar.
Very challenging.
But you were very much in the moment and stayed in the moment. You also had to lip sync to a track of yourself singing, and you know, we found so much to use within each take because you were able to be present and stay in the story, and we were all very silly too.
Thank you. I wanted to do this interview to introduce you foremost with Latin American people, to see how you work, because I had such a great experience with you. Even though you are one of the nicest persons I know, you know how to make us as an actor to be disciplined, to be punctual, to work, and to scold when you have to, which is very rare when you do it. He does it in a very polite manner that you feel like, oh my God, I need to work harder, and you do it. So yeah, it's impressive. Thank you for sharing all of that, Stephen. It's always an honor to talk with you. I don't know if you could share your social media with the audience so they can start following your work, following you.
Okay. Well, on Facebook, I have a professional page, which is @directed by Stephen Nachamie. I think my Instagram is @Stephen Nachamie, but my website is stephennachamie.com, where I'm trying to keep it updated, where you can see all the different sort of compartments of what I do as an artist. You can see the updates on what I'm developing, on what I've directed and what I'm directing. See the scope that I've done from plays to films to the Macy's Parade. You know, it's all storytelling. And that should keep you updated, basically.
Perfect. Thank you very much for sharing that, Stephen. We'll keep in touch. To the audience, see you next episode. Goodbye, everyone. Success to everyone.